we have the wonderful Andrew and Lee, as you can see, with a wonderful background, and both calling in from a bit further away in Bristol. But I know Lee's a Southampton boy at heart. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks everyone. Andrew, you sharing?
Yeah, I'm. It's on the way. You good?
Yep, got it.
All right, fantastic. You gonna get us started?
Yeah, sure. So we wanted to just come and talk today a little bit about using the Power Platform and about embedding the Power Platform in sort of bigger organizations, and how not to think of it as an app specifically, but how to think of it as an ecosystem in a wider technical ecosystem that exists in any client or customer anyway, and how we break that down and then how we actually deliver it. So super quick introductions. My name's Lee Baker. As you can see, I work as a solutions architect at AIS. We are generally working with multinational organizations, and we implement everything from Azure across to Power Platform and M365. Andrew?
Yeah, hey everyone. So this is Andrew Welch. I work with Lee, and I live 5 minutes down the road from Lee as well. So you should see when we get together for drinks, we talk about pretty much this as well. So in any case, yeah, thanks for having us. I lead our business applications practice at AIS, and Lee and I work together with some others who you may know, Keith Watling, Lucy Bourne, Manuela Pichler, on the Power Platform adoption framework, which is all on GitHub, open source. People contribute to it, use it freely, repeat it, improve it, however you like. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is some of it has been in the framework for a while, but some of it is absolutely brand new to the framework. Lee and I just put out a blog post last week that's gotten a lot of kind of traction around data platform. But anyway, the links here, that Runway View is my personal blog. We'll post all of the slides here later on. And if you go to the AKA link from Microsoft, that's Microsoft pointing everyone towards Power Platform Adoption Framework on GitHub. So in any case, we'll start off with this idea around an ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? So, and this is sort of a new, Lee and I have been using the word ecosystem a lot lately, but we wanted to start here, right? Because an ecosystem is essentially the opposite of a pile. And what happens, especially in these large organizations, right, is that they kind of go in on Azure, they go in on Power Platform and Dynamics sitting atop Power Platform, and they go in on Microsoft 365, but they don't think a lot about how those three things are all platforms inside of a single Microsoft cloud. And by and large, they were meant to be used and employed together in our solution development. So in any case, when we think about it, what we're trying to do with an ecosystem, right, is to bring structure to these three platforms living inside of the cloud, the Microsoft cloud, so that as we knit them together, that's how we really get at this idea of cloud transformation and application modernization. So our friend Keith says all the time that Power Platform is the opposite of death by 1,000 cuts. It is success by 1,000 victories. And where in the past we were really concerned with how to implement Dynamics for sales or Dynamics for customer service, now what we're really interested in is how we can migrate 1,000 workloads to Power Platform. And if one of them if some of them are the first-party Dynamics applications, then that's great.
But even to tie that whole thing together, we can only do that and do that at speed once we're thinking about this as a wider ecosystem. Once the security and connectivity is there and set up with Azure and M365, we can really then start to transform it, scale and at speed and with speed. Until that point, there's roadblocks in the way at all times.
Yeah, and ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to enable development of solutions like this. Yeah.
Yeah, so to piece that together, so picking up all different parts of the Power Platform in there, as you see, how do we really enable our power users to get to their reporting that is coming from data lake and blob storage, as well as from Dataverse in the Power Platform and Dynamics. What if that data all has to be run through Azure Synapse and different analytics tools? That can only be done once the ecosystem is set up. Once, as I say, the guardrails, the governance, the security is there, and the organization has been brought on the journey to understand this platform as much as we do.
Yeah, and I'll say that this is actually real world architecture right here. This is a big HR system that we took some particulars out because it's actually customer sensitive and they actually run things on this. So we took some particulars out, but the whole idea, right, is that you've got your HR management. Those are your power users down here. This stands for HR management. This stands for end user workforce that's interacting with their own HR data, their own skills, their own education history, their own emergency contacts, their own performance reviews and appraisals, all of those types of things. And it's really kind of keying, Dataverse is how we're orchestrating a lot of this, but we're bringing in data from an external legacy HR system. This is actually, I don't know what, there we go. This is from an external HR system. There's actually a data gateway here because it comes from on-prem. There's just so much happening here in this particular solution. It's really quite extensive. Sorry, Lee, didn't mean to jump in, but there you go.
Yeah, no, all good. So then kind of scratching into the surface about how do we actually get to that point? How do we actually piece that together? How do we take not just clients on the journey to understand this, but and to buy into this, but how do we set up the technology to succeed? How do we put those guardrails up? And that's actually where the Power Platform adoption framework came from that Andrew mentioned earlier. So I think it started with a few of us in Amsterdam a couple of years ago at an event, all trying to do this, scratching our heads about how we set this up to succeed and be safe in the organizations we were working with at the time. We had no idea. We were all sat around a round table in a room in Amsterdam, and then it got put on a session schedule and a lot of people turned up. So there was a lot of people trying to do this. So it was at that point that we tried to sort of formulate something a little bit more official to follow and to give guidance.
Yeah, so the framework, what we were really kind of dealing with, right, was this idea, and this was a couple of years ago. The third edition of the framework is going to be out in April, and so it's crazy that we've been at it for multiple years now. But what we were really dealing with at the time, and we've continued to see, is that these larger organizations, they really needed this level of rigor, discipline, and best practices to do this. And to me, the really important idea, and God help me, this will be the only time I mention licensing today, unless someone asks an obnoxious question. But to me, it's this, right? A lot of organizations didn't, I think, realize that unlike on the Azure in Azure world, right, where you pay for consumption, so the more you use, the more you pay. When it comes to Power Platform, actually, everything is divided into everything else. So if you acquire the one license and you only migrate one workload or build one solution on the platform, that solution costs the cost of that license. So where you really get the ROI is to, especially in large organizations, is to have, 40, 100, 1,000 things moved to the platform. So in any case, yeah.
So I was just going to say, it works out really expensive, as has been mentioned in kind of the previous talk as well. It works out really expensive to have one Dynamics app, whatever the cost of that is now, or even Power Platform alone, a license is just expensive. But if you've got 1,000 different apps on there, or if each user's got 10 apps on there, cost per app, return on investment is so much higher.
Yeah, for sure. Lee, you got anything else here before we move on to the real meat of this?
No, you good.
All right, good enough. So yeah, Power Platform Adoption Framework, go grab it on GitHub, but it's been created to really aggregate best practices around adopting, managing, and governing at scale. So when we look high level, and what we're going to do is we're going to start high level, and then we're going to dive into some of our favorite best practices that we picked out for tonight. But when we look at the adoption framework, if you're just, for folks who are just getting started with the platform, we recommend that they kind of level off with what we call a quick start, and time box that 1 to 2 months, but make it really important that you get out the door a working production solution. If you're taking more than a few weeks to do that, you are doing it wrong. But you also really plan ahead. That's this bit, with your working group and planning and budgeting. You really plan ahead around management and governance of the platform so that you can build out this ecosystem. And then you get into this mode, and there are no phases here. Really, it's about doing this long term. Over the long run, you're doing these things simultaneously. Building, so that's actually solution development, building solution after solution after solution. We call them workloads, which really comes from more of an Azure context, right? Where in an Azure context, you're sometimes just lifting and shifting something out of an on-prem data center into a VM in the cloud. Then you eventually kind of get to the point where you're maybe refactoring the application, or you're completely rebuilding the application to take advantage of PaaS services. And we call those, in Azure, we call those workloads. So we've kind of adopted the phrase here with Power Platform, because what we often find is that right now, one of our colleagues is working on a project where they're migrating 15,000 InfoPath forms from on-prem SharePoint to Power Platform. So 15,000 InfoPath forms. And what we find is that a lot of times those forms are so numerous because they didn't have a better way to do it. So sometimes we take a form or we take a legacy application and we recombine it. So we get 5 applications become one workload on Power Platform. Sometimes we split them up, where one kind of big mega application becomes 5 different solutions on Power Platform. So rather than calling them apps, we think about, when we're thinking about this sort of large scale migration, we think about them in terms of workloads, because what you have at the beginning is not necessarily going to equal what you have at the end. Next up, we have road mapping. So this is about getting out there in the business with your business stakeholders and your business groups, and just continually assessing candidate workloads and throwing, I call it throwing paint at the wall. There are no bad ideas. It's about building that backlog, building that roadmap continuously so that we can continue to get to value by taking the next thing out of the backlog. And then I'll pass it back to Lee to introduce this one. This is really what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, so for the enterprise management, it's picking up those how we deploy those more important workloads. So if we've got things that are critical to the business, how do we make sure that they are safe? The architecture is good. If these have got a scale to millions of bits of data and thousands of users, how do we make sure that they are scalable? How do we make sure that they can be deployed safely, that we can pass out security and retract security exactly as we need to, whenever we need to? And for apps that are going to be built by others than professional developers, how do we make sure they're empowered? How do we make sure that the right tools are there and the right components are there to be able to make that work? So kind of wanted to push into a couple of these. So if we look at how these kind of sit underneath the ecosystem, we're going to initially look at sort of the platform management part of this, and all of these kind of pillars that will be coming up in a minute are come from the Power Platform adoption framework, and we kind of think of this enterprise management in those 5 pillars, and we kind of attack them in different orders. There's no particular order to this, although there are a few that are more important than others. But we need to make sure that the platform management is there, the architecture is there, including like authentication and licenses, which we ideally won't talk about at all today. The application lifecycle management, so that we are deploying apps correctly, that we have the right quality of app being pushed out, and that we can roll back to any point in time if we need to, if there's bugs gone out in an app. Some security improvements and guardrails to be set up, and the user empowerment that we talked about. And that all really just sits within our Power Platform part of the overall ecosystem.
Lee, how do you handle organizations that try to pick and choose some of these and just kind of blow past one of them, or say, oh no, we don't know about that, or we don't care about that? That's a loaded question. I know the answer to this, but share with the crowd. This is your current frustration, right?
Yeah, as nicely as is possible, you say it's not an option. If you really want this platform to succeed, all of these pillars need attacking it to some degree. There is flexibility on how much we take forward on each of these. Like if we don't want citizen developers, probably nurturing the community, bottom right there, is not something that we need to spend as much time on. But all of these things should be in our mind for as we think about how the platform might evolve over time in any given organization.
Yeah, I've worked with, and Lee has worked with some of these as well. I think it's a really interesting data point. 3 big global organizations, they're all in the Fortune 100, and they're all in the same industry, and they have all taken very, very different approaches. One of them has a load, we're talking thousands and thousands of premium licenses that they paid for, and they couldn't care less about governance. They just want to have professional developers building apps, come what may. Another one has no premium licenses, cares all about governance and management and building that ecosystem, but it's because they want to empower citizen developers. And a third one has premium licenses that they didn't even pay for. Microsoft just gave them these licenses, and they care about nothing but governance. They don't want any citizen developers using the platform, and they only want it used for IT purposes. So it's really kind of interesting. We'll see cases where, a lot of times someone will come along and say, I don't care about this one, right? Which is sort of interesting because we hear all about citizen developers, but some larger organizations are still scared of this. So it's possible to really kind of focus in and focus on some of these, but it's important that you at least account for all of them. I'm going to get rid of this here before someone screenshots that and starts a rumor that I don't care about citizen developers. But it's really important that you at least account for all of them, and you make a conscious decision of which ones we're going to exclude and which ones we're not. And then atop of all of this, that's where we get this idea of Power Platform ecosystem. So Power Platform ecosystem lives on top of this model, and it connects in really interesting ways, right? So we're going to talk about actually the first 3 today. I don't think we're going to have time to talk about platform security, but one of the things that we've been looking at a lot, right, is how on the platform security end, we can take and tie, say, Azure Active Directory security groups, and we can map those to environments inside of Power Platform. And then we can provision access to apps, access to licenses, access to security groups themselves. We can run the entire security model across a big global organization using Azure Active Directory and using what we call access packages. So we're not going to talk in depth about that, but if you're not familiar with the concept of access packages in AAD, go give those a quick Google. They'll probably be really useful for you.
Yeah, so I think it's from here, we just kind of want to dig into those first 3 bullet points, just to show kind of what we believe is the most important 3 to get up and running at speed. So initially, we're going to talk about the COE establishment here. And the COE establishment is more than just talking about some of the starter kits and the tooling that Microsoft gives. It's a softer side of the operation. It's working out which users are engaged in this process. It's about making sure that there's ownership for these. May end up at some organizations where there is one person who is ultimately responsible for all of these different pillars. But until the right people are identified and the right people are in the room to be able to make the decisions and be able to take this forward, things move at a really slow pace. So one of the most important things that can be done is aligning people to these pillars and these dimensions underneath to ensure that we can get the right answers from the right people at the right time.
Yeah, ownership is important, and I ask all the time, who owns this? And sometimes you'll have an organization that is has enough money, has enough people to be really deliberate about this, right? So they can put this person in charge of enterprise architecture, and she owns all of enterprise architecture, and it's very neat and clean, and we're building a COE from scratch. But more often than not, that's actually just not feasible. partly because of the way that people's roles align in an organization. So one of the most important things, if you're trying to get your ecosystem under control, and I don't say control in a bad way, I could say control in an empowering way, right? If you're trying to build this out, what really matters is that every dimension, and there's 22 of them in the bullets here, that every dimension is owned by someone in the IT group. So you might find that the COE starter kit is owned by someone specifically, and community nurturing might be owned by that same person, right? Because they have insight into what's going on across the entire community of citizen developers because they own the COE starter kit. But that doesn't always work, right? Like you might have someone who owns the data ecosystem because they own the data platform all up for the organization across the whole of the Microsoft cloud. Or you might find that someone else, you've got an enterprise architect who owns the environment picture across the entire tenant. So regardless of how it shakes out in the end, it's important that you go line by line through each of these things. And we didn't draw an arrow for every single one of them, that you go line by line and make sure that someone is responsible for maturing, say, environments. Someone is responsible for maturing this dimension and maintaining its integrity over the long run. And this really is what a COE is, right? A lot of people think that COE is this one thing here, the COE starter kit. But notice a couple things. One, we've broken out COE starter kit from COE establishment. Starter kit is about deploying a tool. COE establishment is about the people side of it and making sure that things are owned and matured properly over time. Another thing to note is that the COE owns all of this in the end. And COE starter kit is only 1/22nd of what we need to do. So one of the things that drives me nuts is when I hear people say, hey, have you deployed COE yet? Well, yes. Have you deployed COE yet? Thinking that is governance is like saying, hey, have you installed Word? Installing Word equals you've written a novel. No. It's just that you've installed the thing that you might write the novel with. So we can't say this enough. COE starter kit does not equal center of excellence. And center of excellence does not equal governance. It is the entire all up about this. There is much, much more to it.
And when the conversation is spread that way across the tooling, across the people, and across the guardrails, it does bring people on the journey to understand. Usually in big organizations, it is the security that's a problem for the platform and in bringing in any new piece of tech. So bringing this whole story together and showing that there's ownership, that there's buy-in from the relevant parties really does help accelerate this. The governance, as we've talked about, in the AD and security and authentication, but the COE starter kit does give a really good visual to align with those stories. It does show all of the apps that exist. It does light up everything that exists, when it was created, how it was pieced together, whether it's been approved and at what stage it's at. So all of these three things together give us a really solid foundation to move forward.
Lee, what is the most important dimension?
Oh, environment, without a shadow of a doubt.
There we go. I'm happy we said that, because back to you.
Almost like we knew this was coming, right? Yeah, so we wanted to initially talk about environments a little bit. Environments are the most important dimension here from the technology side, without a shadow of a doubt. If we think about historically with Dynamics, generally everything's going to be on one production environment. Whereas now with Power Platform, we're not restricted to that. We're not restricted to having all of this access only set up in one way for one environment. We can split our environments to cover different types of people, different types of scenarios, complexity of workloads, criticality of workloads. You probably don't want the person who's created a little app for their tea round in the office when we're ever allowed back to an office again to be sat in the same environment to someone who's got an app that's running banking operations that's got billions of pounds running through it each day. Everyone should be held accountable to the standards of which the applications and workloads are fit, that they fit within.
Yeah. So you want the diagram?
Yeah, go for it. That's the easiest way to explain it. So initially, in terms of how we would suggest splitting the environments, they're split on a matrix across centralized responsibility. So this is going to be who's looking after the environment and therefore the workloads within. It's looking after the data, it's looking after the environment itself, making sure the uptime is good, looking after the processes, whether it's ALM processes and such like. And then on the other axis, as you can see, the criticality of the workload. So we talked about productivity apps. Someone's made an app for their little local productivity of whatever they're doing at this time. Maybe they're automating some little bits of business process around their Outlook mailbox. Whereas we've got applications and workloads that, as we say, could be running billions of pounds worth of business. And with a couple more clicks on Andrew's mouse, we'll start to see some of these workloads and environments start to appear here. Talk a little bit about who they're managed by. If you've got critical workloads, yeah, we want a central IT team to be managing those, assigning the permissions and covering everything that's involved there. But this can be split in some ways. Some organizations might be divisional, might be split in separate ways. So we may have business groups that can have their business group productivity environments and important environments, down to the apps that we talked about for your T round sat at the bottom left of the chart there.
Yeah, and some of the biggest changes I see when an organization customizes this, in some cases where you've got particularly large global organizations where different regional business groups are running their own functions, sometimes you will see the critical move down to the business group tier, because it just makes more sense to, say, manage environments that are going to be subject to, say, GDPR restrictions at the business group level rather than at the central IT level, because why trouble ourselves to, why trifle with things like privacy in America and China where nobody cares? So in any case, sometimes you'll see the environment move down. Sometimes you'll see a decision we're not going to have important applications running in Dataverse for Teams, but with some exceptions, it's really important that this is the most important diagram to me in all of Power Platform land, because if you don't get this right, you really will fail at your enterprise rollout. And then finally, we can actually overlay some data best practices here for data storage. So at the productivity end of the spectrum, we're actually looking at more Excel, SharePoint based storage of data. And as we move into the important and certainly into the critical realm, we're getting into the use of, say, Dataverse or Azure Data Services. And the caveat to this being, of course, that this here is Dataverse for Teams. That's what that is. Yeah. Lee, you want to add anything?
No, only that we're not explicitly saying that if a company decides that an important workload should be on SharePoint because there's no risk in some ways, we're kind of not. That's not a hard and fast rule across the bottom, but that is a best practice because we see Azure Data Services. So whether that's Azure SQL or Cosmos DB, hence why those two are in parallel, but that can be fluid along the bottom with the data stores.
Yep, for sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to end with a final concept that Lee and I have been working on this for a little while. And last week, like I said, I wrote a blog post about this. So some of you have maybe seen this on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. But we want to kind of walk through this because this is a very, we were just chatting with some folks in the product group about this earlier. And this is a very kind of new concept. And I think this modern data platform architecture is probably the next big frontier when it comes to business applications, Microsoft business applications. So we start with this realm of data collection. Data collection, that's the end user stuff. That's the tip of the spear here that our users are using to interact with their data, apps, chatbots, automation, etc. And by and large, this data lives inside of Dataverse, but Dataverse pushes and pulls data from other sources as well. So we've identified another kind of a series of other storage options. Data Lake, if you're trying to apply really kind of big data analytics, Cosmos DB, if you have really high throughput that would just exhaust the throttling limits on Dataverse very quickly, and then blob storage for unstructured data. Dataverse itself is a structured database, so it lives in this family of data sources, unstructured being, say, images, files, videos, anything that's not kind of living in a table, basically. And then streaming, that's your IoT data, your sensors inside of a car, thermometers inside of an assembly line, what have you. And we ingest that data through services in Azure like Data Factory to build, say, an ETL or to splice data together, and then Event Grid. Event Grid, if you're not familiar with it, essentially in the past, we basically had to listen to a data source to know when something had been updated. We called that polling. Event Grid eliminates that by essentially receiving a push notification, what amounts to a push notification, not really, but that's basically what it is, from a data source to alert Event Grid when an action has been taken on data so that downstream effects can be enacted. And Data Factory integrates directly with Dataverse as well. Kind of moving around the circle here, we've got Azure Cognitive Services, Dynamics Customer Insights. A lot of people, you're probably familiar with that. Databricks, Stream Analytics for rapidly processing and analyzing IoT data, and then visualizing all of this in Power BI as our visualization engine, which we also know plugs back into Dataverse as well. So what we've done is we've basically built a loop or a wheel here around which data kind of passes until it ultimately is delivered back into the hands of end users who need to take action on that data via the same means of data collection. So this is really high level. Go check out that blog post. We can drop the link in the chat. But with that, we will conclude and say thank you, and say thank you to the guy who came before us and gave us some extra time. Very appreciative. Yeah, back to you guys.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. As I know, we've got lots of got very experienced people on the call in the Microsoft world. We've got also people who are complete novices, which is exactly what we want in these communities. And the Microsoft architecture is massive nowadays, and I know things are changing so fast that it's hard for people even who are in the loop to keep up, but it's great to put everything together and really paint that picture at the end there, which yeah, is perfect. And I saw that a few days ago and thought it was fantastic. So thank you, Andrew and Lee.
Thanks, everybody.
No, it's great.
Yeah,
and if
thanks,
anyone
everyone.
has any questions, then pop them in the chat, or I'm sure the guys would be happy if you reached out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I'm gonna drop a link to the data platform in the chat right now. So I'm gonna drop the LinkedIn there, and we also have got we also have a GitHub a ticket running on GitHub. If anyone has feedback for this, either leave a comment on LinkedIn or on the blog itself, or just on the GitHub site as well.
Fantastic, brilliant, and fingers crossed. I know we've got events coming up, but fingers crossed the next Dynamics event is in person. You never know. We will hope. But yeah, no, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it, and hopefully we can catch up soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's hope so.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for attending. And like I said, there's events coming up over the next few months and weeks. So keep in tune with the LinkedIn event and the Meetup event, and hopefully see you soon. So thank you very much, everyone.